The wind had a cruel voice that night. It howled through the narrow streets of Bloomfield, lifting flakes of snow into small white storms. A little girl walked alone, her steps unsteady, her small boots leaving a fragile trail behind her. Her name was Emily Carter, 8 years old, wrapped in a coat far too thin for the winter. She carried an old backpack that clinked faintly with the sound of something metallic. A spoon maybe, and a tin cup. Everything she owned was inside. It was past midnight and most of the town was asleep. The lights from the diner on Main Street had gone out hours ago. Christmas decorations still hung in some windows, faded wreaths, paper angels, strings of lights that flickered weakly against the wind. But to Emily, they looked like memories from a world she no longer belonged to. She had left the children's shelter 2 nights ago, slipping out through the kitchen door while everyone else was eating. They had food there, yes, but also whispers and cruelty. "No one wants you," one of the older girls had hissed once. She'd believed it then. Now her hands were stiff with cold. She pressed them under her arms as she walked the night, biting through her sleeves. Her stomach ached with hunger, but more than that, it ached with loneliness. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the snow wanted to keep her there, to freeze her into the quiet of the street. She stopped in front of a convenience store. The bright sign buzzed like a trapped bee. Inside, a man in a thick jacket mopped the floor. Emily pushed the door open just enough to feel the heat from the air inside. The man glanced up, frowning. "Hey, we're closed. You can't be in here," he said. His voice was not unkind, but it had no room for her either. She nodded, stepped back, and let the door close. The warmth disappeared instantly. By the time she reached the park, the snow was almost knee-deep. The swings were covered in white, motionless, under the frozen moonlight. She found a bench under a tree, its surface icy but sheltered from the wind. That was when she saw him. A dog lay curled in the shadow of the bench, just a shape at first, a mound of fur trembling faintly. When he lifted his head, she saw his eyes gold-brown and wary, a thin Labrador mixed ribs showing through his coat. He let out a low growl, the sound more of fear than anger. "It's okay," Emily whispered. Her breath came out like smoke. "I just need to sit." The dog didn't move as she lowered herself onto the far end of the bench. For a long moment, neither of them made a sound. The snow kept falling soft and endless, burying their footprints together. She pulled her knees up to her chest and rested her chin on them. The cold crept through the wood and into her bones. After a while, she heard the dog shift. His paws pressed against the snow, and he crept closer, inch by cautious inch. Emily looked at him, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "You're cold too, huh?" she murmured. "Maybe we can share." She opened her coat a little, inviting the warmth that wasn't there. The dog hesitated, then came closer until she could feel his body against her side, thin, trembling, but alive. His breath smelled faintly of damp leaves. She reached out and touched his back. The fur was rough, but it was warmth nonetheless. In the faint light of the street lamp, their shadows merged, one small, one low, both fragile. Emily leaned her head against the dog's side. The rhythm of his breathing steadied her. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed its tires, whispering over ice. Her eyelids grew heavy. The pain in her fingers faded, replaced by a strange calm. She thought of her mother's face, soft, tired, smiling, even in the hospital bed. "Be brave, sweetheart," her mother had said. Emily had promised she would. But bravery was hard when the world was this cold. The dog made a sound, a low sigh, and she smiled weakly. "Don't worry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll just sleep a little. When it's morning, it'll be warm again." The dog lifted his head, ears twitching, as if listening to her heartbeat. Then he curled closer, pressing his body against hers until the shaking stopped. Snow began to cover their shoes, their hair, the folds of Emily's coat. Under the dim streetlight, they looked like a single shape, two forgotten souls holding on to each other against the endless winter. In the quiet, the town's clock struck 1. Its distant chime drifted through the frozen air, fading into silence. No one saw them there. But in that park, on that bench, something tender and defiant took root, a tiny spark of life refusing to go out. And as the wind swept over Bloomfield, the only sound left was the soft breathing of a child and a stray dog sharing what little warmth the night allowed. Morning came pale and quiet over Bloomfield. The storm had passed, leaving a thin light that seemed to hesitate before touching the frozen park. On a wooden bench half buried in snow, a small girl stirred beneath a tattered coat. Emily opened her eyes. Her breath rose like mist catching the faint sunlight. For a long moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she felt movement beside her, a slow, steady rhythm against her side. The dog was still there, pressed close, his golden fur dusted with frost. She blinked surprised. "Hey," she whispered, voice dry and hoarse. "You didn't leave." The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. His brown eyes studied her face. He looked cautious but not afraid. She smiled a little, though her lips trembled from the cold. "Guess we both survived," she murmured. Her fingers, stiff and red, searched the pocket of her coat. She found half a cracker wrapped in paper, cracked it in two, and held one piece toward him. "Here, buddy," she said, not realizing she'd just named him. "Breakfast." The dog sniffed the offering and took it gently, crunching with slow gratitude. Emily ate her piece too, though it tasted more of snow than anything else. Still, it was enough to make her feel alive. The park was empty. Frost glittered on the swing chains, and the trees creaked softly in the wind. From somewhere far off came the faint ring of a church bell. 8 slow notes echoing across the town. Emily pulled her knees to her chest and leaned her head on them. The air burned her lungs when she breathed. She looked at the dog again. "You must have been alone too," she said. "Nobody wanted you either." Buddy, for that was his name now, whether he knew it or not, wagged his tail once, then pressed his head against her arm. She reached out, stroking the rough fur along his neck. Beneath her hand, she felt the beat of his heart, strong and real. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. They sat like that for a while, two shapes in the snow, sharing a silence that felt almost sacred. Every few minutes, Buddy would lift his head and sniff the air, alert to sounds Emily couldn't hear. The world was waking up, a truck engine coughing to life, a door slamming somewhere down the street. But no one came to the park. No one saw them. After a time, Emily tried to stand. Her legs were weak, her feet mumbling inside soaked boots. The moment she straightened, dizziness washed over her. She caught the edge of the bench to steady herself. Buddy barked softly once. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "We just need to find someplace warm." She took a few steps, but the snow was deep and her knees buckled. The dog trotted beside her, whining. When she fell to her knees, he barked again, louder this time. "Shh," she said, forcing a smile. "Don't worry, I just need to rest." She sank down against the bench, pulling her coat tighter. Her fingers no longer obeyed her. They felt like someone else's hands. The cold was everywhere now, creeping inside her chest behind her eyes. She pressed her face into Buddy's fur. It smelled of earth and leaves and something wild. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." Buddy circled once and settled against her side, curling close, his tail covering her knee. He began to tremble, not from fear, but from the same cold she felt. Emily tried to hum something her mother used to sing, a lullaby about stars, but the words broke halfway through. Snowflakes landed on her lashes, melting into tears she was too tired to wipe away. Around them, the world turned silent again. Then Buddy's head snapped up. His ears perked, nose twitching. He heard something, perhaps a car far down the road, or the shift of wind through trees. Emily didn't move. Her eyes were closed now, breath shallow and slow. Buddy nudged her shoulder. No response. He nudged again, harder, whimpering. Then he barked once, sharp and clear. When she didn't stir, he barked again, louder this time, the sound echoing through the still air. The noise startled a flock of pigeons from the church roof. They rose in a gray cloud, wings beating frantically against the skylight. Buddy barked again and again, his voice desperate, rising into the quiet town like a plea. Somewhere beyond the park, a truck engine slowed. Buddy ran in circles, snow flying from his paws, then returned to Emily's side, pressing against her chest. He barked once more, the sound raw and urgent, the sound that would soon change everything. The sound of barking tore through the still morning air. It bounced off the frozen storefronts, rolled down the empty street, and carried far beyond the park. The voice of the dog was desperate, sharp, rising, falling, as if trying to pull someone back from the edge of silence. A few blocks away, Richard Hale was driving his old pickup truck toward the church. The bed of the truck was loaded with boxes of blankets and canned food donations he delivered every week. The radio played faintly, a station full of static and soft gospel music. He kept it on mostly for the noise. Silence still made him uneasy. The barking reached him faintly at first, half drowned by the hum of the engine. He frowned, turning the volume down. When it came again, louder, more insistent, he slowed the truck. It didn't sound like the usual stray noise of the town. It sounded like a call. He pulled over near the park entrance and stepped out. The cold hit him immediately, sharp enough to steal his breath. Snow crunched under his boots as he followed the sound. The world was white and still except for that one voice crying out from somewhere ahead. When he reached the bench under the old elm tree, he froze. There, half covered in snow, lay a small girl and a dog curled beside her. The dog barked once more, then went quiet, watching him with wide, pleading eyes. "Oh God," Richard murmured. He dropped to his knees. The child's face was pale, lips tinged blue. He touched her wrist, weak pulse, but still there. Relief flooded through him, mixed with panic. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her small body. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, not sure if she could hear. "You're safe now." The dog pressed against his arms, shivering violently but refusing to move away from her. Richard looked at him, a thin Labrador mixed ribs showing eyes bright with worry. The sight hit him harder than he expected. For a moment he saw another small face, his daughter's, the one he'd lost 4 winters ago. He swallowed hard and pulled out his phone. "This is Richard Hale," he said into it, voice shaking. "I'm at Bloomfield Park. There's a maybe 8. She's freezing. Send an ambulance, please hurry." The operator promised help was coming. Richard ended the call and turned back to the girl. He brushed the snow from her hair, murmuring nonsense words, anything to keep her tethered to the world. The dog nudged her cheek with his nose, whining softly. When the first siren rose in the distance, Richard exhaled shakily. "They're coming," he said. "Hold on, little one." The dog barked once as if answering him. Minutes later, the ambulance pulled up beside the park. 2 paramedics jumped out, their breath steaming in the cold. "She's hypothermic," one said quickly. "Let's move." They lifted her gently onto a stretcher, wrapping her in thermal blankets. As they carried her toward the vehicle, the dog lunged forward, barking wildly. "It's okay," Richard said, grabbing his collar. "They're helping her." But the dog wouldn't let go. His claws scraped the metal step of the ambulance, his body shaking with panic. "Let him come," one of the paramedics said softly. "He's not leaving her anyway." So they did. The dog climbed in, settling beside the stretcher, his muzzle resting on the girl's hand. The sight made Richard's throat tighten. He climbed into his truck and followed the flashing lights all the way to Bloomfield General. The drive was short but felt endless. He kept seeing the girl's face in his mind, how fragile she'd looked, and how fiercely the dog had fought to protect her. It stirred something he hadn't let himself feel in years. When the ambulance stopped, he parked nearby and waited. The paramedics hurried inside with the stretcher. The dog trotted beside them, tail low, eyes fixed on the girl. Snowflakes clung to his fur like tiny stars. Richard stood by his truck for a long moment, staring at the hospital entrance. The glass doors slid open and closed the light inside, warm and golden. He felt the weight of memory pressing on his chest, the same kind of night, the same rush through cold air. But back then, it had ended differently. He took a deep breath and walked toward the doors. Inside, nurses moved quickly, voices calm but urgent. The girl disappeared behind a curtain. The dog sat outside it, silent now, as if understanding he had done his part. Richard sank into a chair in the waiting area. His hands were shaking. On the floor, near his boots, melted snow formed small puddles. He looked at them, at the trail of wet paw prints leading from the entrance to the curtain. He whispered almost to himself, "You did good, buddy." The dog turned his head at the sound of the word buddy and thumped his tail once against the tile. For the first time in years, Richard felt warmth that had nothing to do with the coat he'd lost in the snow. It was something older, quieter, the faint return of belief. Outside, the storm had finally stopped. The world beyond the windows glowed silver with morning light. And somewhere inside that fragile silence, a child began to breathe a little stronger. The steady rhythm of a machine hummed softly in the quiet room. Somewhere nearby, a monitor beeped in slow, patient intervals. Emily's eyelids fluttered, heavy and confused. For a moment, she thought the sound was part of a dream, the sea maybe, or the wind behind a window. Then she realized she wasn't cold anymore. The ceiling above her was white, not the color of snow, but of light. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sweet like clean sheets. When she turned her head, she saw a small table with a cup of water and a folded blanket. Beyond that, near the foot of the bed, a golden shape moved. "Buddy." He was lying on the floor, his head resting on his paws, his fur brushed and clean. When she whispered his name, though she hadn't said it before, somehow she knew it. His tail began to thump softly against the tile. "Hey, boy," she murmured. Her voice came out weak, a rasp more than a sound. Buddy stood stretched and carefully placed his front paws on the edge of the bed. His nose nudged her hand, warm and real. That was when she noticed the man sitting quietly in the chair beside her. He'd been there long enough for the lines of exhaustion to settle around his eyes. A thermos sat untouched on the table next to him. When Emily looked at him, he smiled, a small, uncertain thing that seemed to surprise even him. "Morning," he said softly. "You gave us quite a scare." She blinked, still trying to piece together where she was, who he was. "The park," she whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, you were out there a long time. The doctor says you are lucky." He paused, lucky and brave. His voice carried the kind of calm that made her feel safe. It was deep worn at the edges, like wood that had weathered many winters. "Are you the doctor?" she asked. He chuckled under his breath. "No, just the man who found you. Name's Richard." She stared at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. The words came small but clear. He looked away then, as if unsure how to hold gratitude. "Don't thank me," he murmured. "Thank your friend there. He's the one who wouldn't stop barking." Emily turned back to Buddy, who wagged his tail proudly. "You did that," she said, smiling faintly. Buddy's ears perked up as if he understood. Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin of soup from the cafeteria. "You should try to eat," he said, unscrewing the lid. "It's not much, but it's warm." He helped her sit up, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. The soup smelled like chicken and salt, and something that reminded her of home. She took small sips while he watched his hands, folded, his eyes distant. After a few minutes, she asked, "Why were you at the park?" He hesitated before answering. "I was on my way to the church. I drop off donations there every week." He paused again, as though measuring his words. "Used to do it with my daughter." Emily tilted her head. "Where is she?" Richard's gaze shifted to the window. Outside, snow drifted past the glass, melting into streaks of water that caught the light. "She's gone," he said simply. 4 years now. Emily didn't know what to say. She reached out, placing her small hand on the blanket near his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, his throat tight. "Me too." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The hum of the hospital filled the silence. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed quietly and a radio played an old hymn. When Emily finished her soup, she looked at him again. "You said I'm lucky," she said. "But maybe you are too." He raised an eyebrow. "How's that?" "Because you found us," she said, pointing to Buddy. "If you hadn't stopped, you'd still be alone." The words hung between them, soft but true. Richard felt something shift in his chest, a crack letting light through. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. Instead, he just nodded and smiled, the first real smile he'd given in years. The nurse came in, then cheerful and brisk, to check Emily's temperature. "Doing better, sweetheart," she said. "You'll be ready to leave in a few days." "Leave," Emily echoed, uncertain. Richard stood, pulling on his coat. "Don't worry about that yet," he said. "You rest. I'll be back tomorrow." She watched him move toward the door, then called out, "Richard." He turned. "Can Buddy stay with me?" He looked at the tatas, then at the nurse, who shrugged with a smile. "As long as he behaves," she said. Richard nodded. "He'll behave." Before he left, he reached out and gently adjusted the blanket over Emily's shoulders. "Sleep," he said. "You're safe now." She nodded, eyes heavy, and drifted back toward dreams. Buddy settled at her side again, sighing contentedly. Richard paused at the doorway, watching them. The girl, the dog, the quiet miracle of survival. Outside the window, morning sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the room in gold. For the first time in years, he didn't hurry to leave. He just stood there, letting the warmth find him. Snow still lined the streets of Bloomfield, though the sky had cleared to a pale blue. The town seemed softer somehow, the edges no longer sharp with cold. From the window of Richard's truck, Emily watched the trees blur past her reflection, faint in the glass. Buddy's head rested on her lap, eyes half closed in a rare calm. Richard drove slowly, both hands on the wheel. He hadn't said much since leaving the hospital, and Emily didn't mind. Silence with him didn't feel heavy. It felt safe, like being wrapped in a thick blanket. The radio played an old tune from the 70s, crackling through static. She caught a few words, "Home light forever," and smiled. When the truck turned into a narrow lane lined with pines, Emily leaned forward. "You live here?" she asked. Richard nodded. "Yeah, been here a long time. Used to feel too big for one person." The house appeared at the end of the lane, a small two-story wooden home with a red porch and a chimney breathing thin smoke. The driveway was dusted with snow, and a stack of firewood leaned neatly against the wall. It wasn't fancy, but it looked like the kind of place where warmth could stay. Inside, the air smelled of pine and coffee. Richard hung his coat and motioned toward the living room. "You can sit anywhere you like," he said. Emily stepped carefully, her boots squeaking on the wood floor. She touched the edge of a worn sofa, the soft throw blanket, the photos on the mantel. One caught her eye, a man, a woman, and a little girl with braids all smiling in the sunlight. She didn't need to ask who they were. Richard followed her gaze. "That was my family," he said quietly. "Before the accident." Emily nodded, not prying further. "She looks kind," she said. "She was," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. Then shaking himself, he smiled. "Come on, let's get that fire going again." Buddy wagged his tail, trotting after him to the fireplace. Richard knelt, adding logs, then struck a match. Flames caught quickly, painting the room in amber light. Emily knelt beside Buddy, watching as he lay down, basking in the warmth. For the first time in months, Emily felt her fingers thaw completely. She stretched her hands toward the fire and let out a sigh that sounded too old for her age. Richard poured 2 mugs of cocoa and handed her one. "Careful, it's hot," he said. She took it in both hands, staring into the steam. "It smells like Christmas," she said. He chuckled. "Haven't celebrated that in a long time." "You should," she said. "Maybe we could, together?" He looked at her, surprised by how natural the word we sounded. "Maybe we could," he said finally. Over the next few days, the house came alive again. Richard cleared out the spare bedroom, painting the walls soft yellow. Emily insisted on helping, leaving tiny handprints on the sheet of newspaper under the paint can. They visited the diner in town where the waitress, a woman named Marlene, slipped Emily an extra muffin for the dog. Buddy followed them everywhere. He slept at the foot of Emily's bed, waited by the door when Richard went out, and spent hours stretched before the fire like he owned the place. The three of them moved around each other easily, as if they'd been a family long before they'd met. One afternoon, Richard found Emily sitting at the kitchen table drawing with a broken pencil. The paper showed 3 stick figures and 1 dog beneath a bright yellow sun. "That's us," she said when he looked. "I even drew your truck." He smiled. "Looks just like it." "You should hang it up," she said. He did right on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a heart. That night, the snow began again, soft and slow. Richard stood by the window watching it fall. The sound of Emily's laughter drifted from the living room where she was playing with Buddy. The house no longer felt too big. It felt full. When she came to stand beside him, she asked, "Do I still have to go back to the shelter?" He looked down at her. "Only if you want to," he said. She shook her head quickly. "I want to stay." He hesitated, years of caution, of fear of loss, but then he nodded. "Then stay," he said simply. Her arms wrapped around his waist before he could react. For a moment he froze, then returned the embrace, his hand resting gently on her back. Buddy barked once, as if approving. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Richard sat alone by the fire. On the table lay a stack of adoption forms he'd picked up that afternoon. He traced the edge of the papers with his finger, smiling to himself. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time since the accident, he wanted one. He glanced toward the hallway where a small lamp glowed through the crack of Emily's door. Buddy lifted his head from the rug, eyes half open, keeping watch. Richard whispered into the quiet, "We're home now." The fire popped softly in reply, and outside the snow fell steady and kind. The winter morning was softer than before. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky the color of pale milk. Along the road, pine trees stood heavy with snow, their branches bending but unbroken. Inside the little wooden house at the end of the lane, warmth breathed quietly in the smell of coffee, in the soft hum of a radio, and in the sound of a child laughing for the first time in weeks. Richard Hale stirred oatmeal on the stove, the spoon clicking gently against the pot. Buddy lay nearby, his fur glistening where sunlight struck, its tail sweeping the floor in slow rhythm. At the table, Emily sat wrapped in one of Richard's flannel shirts, her feet barely touching the floor. Her cheeks held the faintest color, now her hands no longer trembling. She leaned forward eagerly. "You always make breakfast." Richard smiled over his shoulder. "Every morning. Same thing. Oatmeal's reliable." "It smells nice," she said. "Not like the shelter." "Then we'll call that progress," he replied, turning off the stove. He filled 2 bowls and set one in front of her. Steam rose between them, carrying the scent of cinnamon and safety. Buddy nosed her leg hopeful, and she slipped him a tiny crumb of toast. Richard pretended not to see. They ate in silence. That wasn't empty. Outside, snow slid from the roof with a dull thud, and the wind sighed softly against the windows. For the first time in years, Richard didn't feel the cold inside him. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The world glittered under sunlight. Emily ran ahead, boots crunching through white drifts. Buddy chased her, barking with joy, kicking up snow. "Don't go too far," Richard called, his voice carrying laughter. "I won't," she shouted back, spinning in circles. Her laughter echoed down the lane, thin but bright, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed. When she stopped, she looked toward the road that led back to town. "Do you think they're looking for me?" she asked. "Maybe," Richard said. "But they'll know you're safe." She nodded, quiet for a moment. "I don't want to go back there." He hesitated, then crouched beside her. "You don't have to," he said gently. "You've got a place here, as long as you want it." Her small hand found his. "Then this is home." The words landed like a promise. For years, this house had been only walls around his grief. Now it felt like a heartbeat. They spent the late morning stringing up a few dusty Christmas lights along the porch. Only half of them worked, but Emily insisted they were perfect. She cut paper snowflakes from old envelopes and taped them to the window. Buddy sat in the snow, head tilted, as if supervising. Later, they drove into town. The grocer waved from behind the counter. "Heard what you did, Richard. That girl, that dog, folks around here are still talking." Richard shook his head. "The dog deserves the credit." The man laughed. "Well, then I'll keep an extra bone behind the counter for him." Back home, afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, painting the living room in gold. The fire murmured softly in the hearth. Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, drawing with colored pencils. Buddy sprawled beside her, paws twitching in sleep. "I'm making a sign," she said without looking up. "It's for the front door. It'll say the Buddy House." Richard looked over his newspaper. "The Buddy House because he saved me," she said. "And you too," he chuckled. "You might be right," she grinned, her teeth flashing bright. "Then we'll never forget." As evening fell, they pinned her drawing above the mantel of the house. A girl, a man, and a dog under a sky full of yellow stars. The firelight shimmered across the paper, turning crayon lines into something alive. When bedtime came, Emily lingered at the door to her room. "Richard, yeah, are you sure I can stay?" He nodded. "I'm sure." "Then good night," she whispered, climbing into bed. Buddy curled up beside her, sighing contentedly. "Good night, sweetheart." Downstairs, Richard poured himself a small cup of coffee and stood by the window. Outside, the snow had started again, small, delicate flakes drifting through the streetlight glow. He could see the reflection of the living room behind him, the fire, the drawings, the faint golden warmth spilling from Emily's room. For a long moment, he just stood there, letting the quiet fill him. The ache in his chest was still there, but it no longer hollowed him out. Loss had made space, and now that space was full again, with breath, with light, with life. He thought of his daughter and the way she used to tug his sleeve and say, "Look, Dad, the snow's starting." He looked out now and whispered, "I see it, kiddo." He turned off the lamp, leaving only the firelight. Upstairs, Emily mumbled something in her sleep, and Buddy gave a soft bark as if to answer. Richard smiled. "We made it," he said quietly. The wind brushed against the windows, gentle as a blessing. Somewhere down the lane, another dog barked once, a lonely sound that faded quickly into peace. Inside the little house, 3 hearts beat together, steady, warm, and unafraid, while outside, snow kept falling through the night, covering the world in white silence that promised a kinder morning. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10 and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story, where love, and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.